Hello?
I'm still here.
Okay. I'm pressing down. I've been watching emergency shows, like hospital shows.
I understand. Keep your elbows straight. Use the weight of your upper body to push.
I think he's just dead. He's been shot.
He's been shot?
Yes.
Okay. Are you still willing to try to do...
I'm doing compressions now.
Okay. Keep your elbows straight.
Can I ask her a question, Arrow?
What's that?
Can I ask her a question?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. You said your husband was shot?
Yes.
How long ago?
Probably 10, 15 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, maybe.
10 minutes ago he was shot?
Maybe 15.
By whom?
Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. Now, I want to give you a little bit of a warning about today's case because it takes place in the last 10 years. It was in 2014, but it is a very controversial one. It has to do with lying, money, a lot of different things, but from what I have gathered during the research, it seems like people are split pretty 50-50 on this. So I definitely want to know what you guys think as we go along. Let me know in the comments, and maybe even put a timestamp of the first red flag you see. But I just want to ask everybody to, kind of just let's be kind in the comments, okay? Because not everybody's going to agree, but we want to have open conversation. We want to do all the things, So I'm going to stop talking. Let's get right into it. It's officially December, and what is better during cozy season than something warm, yummy, tasty, hot chocolatey? Nothing. And I am so excited to share with you, Beam is having its biggest sale of the year. You can get up to 50% off my exclusive Beam flavor right now. You guys have heard me talk about it. I'm going to talk about it again because it's that good, but it is the stuff that dreams are made of, literally. You will fall asleep fast. You will stay asleep. You will wake up well rested. And the best part is it literally tastes like dessert. It's like a sweet treat right before bed. It's only 15 calories, 0 added sugar. You fall asleep fast, you stay asleep, you wake up well rested, and it comes in so many flavors. But my exclusive flavor, salty chocolate caramel, I believe is the best, and it is so good. So many of you guys have tried it and told me you absolutely love the flavor as well. So if you've been wondering if you want to try it, now's the time because it's their biggest sale of the year. And look, not to get all Bill Nye the Science Guy on you, but the proof is in the science. Because like I tell you all the time, I wear an Oura ring. It tracks my sleep. On the nights where I forget to drink my Beam, my sleep scores are in the trash. But when I drink it regularly, like I always do, I am sleeping like a baby. The proof is right there. It's so easy to make. It takes 2 seconds. You can make it with warm water or warm milk. I prefer water. It just tastes really good to me. And I drink it 30 minutes before I want to be asleep, and then boom, it is lights out. So like I said, my exclusive flavor of Dream is 50% off and almost sold out. This is the lowest price that Dream has ever been, so definitely don't wait. Get your salty chocolate caramel Dream right now by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on the screen so that you can shop it now. This is selling fast, so grab it before it sells out. Once it's gone, it won't be back again, so definitely snag it while you can. In 2014, Thomas Gilbert Jr. was 30 years old. He went by Tommy for short, and his parents were Thomas Gilbert Sr. and Shelley Gilbert. Now, they were very wealthy, and they were also very well known in their community. Not long after Tommy was born, back in 1984, the couple also welcomed a daughter into the family too. Now, I mentioned that the family was rich and pretty well respected, right? And I was not using those words lightly. We're talking about pretty intense generational wealth here. See, Tommy's father, Thomas Sr., had grown up with every single thing that his heart could desire. He went to fancy prep schools. He went to an Ivy League college. He had degrees from both Harvard and Princeton. I don't even think I've ever met anybody in my life who's gone to an Ivy League school. Is that weird? Is that weird? They always say you're a reflection of the 5 people you surround yourself with. I don't think I know anybody who's gone to an Ivy League school. Is that weird? Should I be concerned? But anyway, you guys get what I'm saying. Like, he went to the prep schools, the Ivy Leagues. He was like generational wealth, like rock solid. He had all sorts of different resources, all sorts of connections. He now had the degrees to pretty much do whatever he wanted after graduation. And he decided that he wanted to make a name for himself on Wall Street. So that's exactly what he did. He became a very successful investor, and he basically got to be very rich in his own right now. He didn't need his mom and dad's money anymore. He had his own. Then there was Shelley, the mother, who also came from a very wealthy and respected family. She was also kind of, if you've seen the show, I'm just going to relate to it for a second. She was like a cross between a character from Gossip Girl and The Great Gatsby. Like, pretend one of those took place in the 70s and the 80s, and it was like a cross between the two of them. Now, she didn't just come from money. She also had made something of herself career-wise, just like Thomas Sr. And when the two of them met, Shelley was actually the assistant vice president for a company called the Newcourt Securities Corporation. Now, the point in all of that, and the reason I'm telling you, is because Shelley and Thomas Sr. were both very, very wealthy, very well-known, very successful in their own right, really. So when they got together, it was like they truly became a power couple. They had two of the biggest names in New York high society. They were wealthy, they were connected. That also, of course, meant that they surrounded themselves with the absolute wealthiest and well-connected people as well. You know how it is, like birds of a feather flock together. I think that's the saying. So anyway, Thomas Sr. and Shelley married in 1981, and then their kids, Tommy and Claire, were born. Afterward, Shelley decided that she wanted to become a full-time stay-at-home mom. Meanwhile, Thomas Sr. kept kind of doing, the big shot business guy thing, making money, making connections, all the things, and he was managing businesses that were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So naturally, the kids had all of the best things that money could buy as they grew up. They never went without. Tommy went to a place called the Buckley School, which is an all-boys school in New York City, and this school also is like kind of ripped from Gossip Girl in the sense that tuition is over $60,000 a year for an all-boys, like, younger school. Like, it's crazy. So you can imagine what kinds of kids would go somewhere like that, right? And how really by going there, so many doors would just open for anybody who graduated from there. The only problem with all of that is that little Tommy didn't graduate. And in 8th grade, he actually dropped out. Now, you might expect his parents to be very angry or very upset by this, not only because they spent all of that money on this fancy private school that Tommy now wasn't finishing, but also kind of like diminishing the family's reputation, right? A little bit. But when somebody asked Tommy's mom, Shelley, about Tommy dropping out, she defended him. She said, 8th grade at Buckley is notorious. People who graduate with honors from Ivy League schools talk about how 8th grade is the toughest year, the toughest academic year at Buckley's. As though that somehow makes it okay to drop out. I don't know. I really don't. Take that how you will. But either way, Tommy dropped out, and he ended up transferring to Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts. Now, I don't know this 100% for sure or anything, but I have to wonder if it was an attempt to kind of hide him or hide away something and get him kind of sorted out. You know how sometimes the wealthy people will like scoot you over to like a camp or like one of those kinds of schools, and not the Paris Hilton example because that's a bad one, but you know what I'm talking about? And it's not like there's this huge shortage of expensive private schools in New York, so why go all the way out of state? I mean, maybe Thomas Sr. and Shelley thought that their rich friends would have Tommy under a microscope after he dropped out. So maybe they wanted him out of sight to, get his crap in order. Again, I'm just speculating, but wanted to just throw it out there as a possibility as we continue. But either way, Deerfield seemed to be a very nice change of pace for Tommy. He kept up with all of his schoolwork. He played football, played basketball, even played baseball. And sometimes Thomas Sr. and Shelley and his sister Claire would pack up and travel to Massachusetts just to watch one of his games. He seemed to be thriving. Now, Tommy was also a huge social butterfly. He talked to anyone and everyone, and all of the girls basically swooned over him. He had blonde hair, blue eyes. He grew up to be over 6 feet tall. The girls literally came flocking, and he didn't mind one bit. It kind of also reminds me, I'm just going to say it, it's a TikTok song. It's probably old news now, but you get, what is it? 6'5", blue eyes, finance. I can't sing. That's so embarrassing. But you get what I mean. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, over 6 feet, came from money. Like, girls were so attracted to this guy. And academically, he wasn't just taking the easiest classes to get by. I mean, his senior year, he took 4 AP classes. He apparently had an IQ of 140. He also became fluent in Mandarin, which I'm not fluent in that. I'm not fluent in any other language, but from my understanding, it is a pretty difficult language to learn. Apparently, the dean of the school was pretty impressed with how he was doing, so much so that they asked Tommy to proctor the freshman-sophomore dorms. And that role is sort of like being a resident advisor in a college dorm, where you kind of oversee the floor, oversee the dorms. You're the go-to person if somebody needs assistance or help or has a problem, things like that. So when it came to deciding what to do after graduation, Tommy ended up getting early admission to Princeton, which, as we know, was where his dad, Thomas Sr., went. So, I mean, how much more perfect could things get, right? Well, as we know, and as we know why we're here today, as perfect as everything looked on paper, it wasn't all sunshine and, rainbows and roses. Because during his freshman year at Princeton, Tommy began changing. Now, this didn't just pop up completely out of nowhere. He actually had some warning signs in his senior year of high school. But they were really subtle, they were minor, they were easy to miss. It was when Tommy got to Princeton, though, that he really started struggling in an obvious and very apparent kind of way. Except at first, Tommy's parents weren't too concerned. He seemed kind of exhausted, and I mean, what college freshman isn't, but at the same time, he also basically completely changed his personality. He used to be outgoing and social, but now Tommy was super quiet. Like way more quiet than he ever had been before. So Thomas Sr. and Shelley were basically like, well, those two things must be related and it must all be normal and not a reason for concern. He's exhausted, so he of course just doesn't have the energy to talk all day long, to meet new people, that sort of thing. So they just blew it off for a little while. But as time went on and Tommy's symptoms got worse, his mom, Shelley in particular, started noticing symptoms that started to make her think of OCD. I mean, Tommy got to be obsessed with germs, and I don't mean in a normal way, like how people will make sure they wash their hands before they eat or after they use the bathroom. It wasn't like that. It was eccentric. It was not, maybe eccentric's not the right word, but it was like hyper-focused. He thought that everything, literally everything around him was contaminated. That was his word, not mine. Tommy would just look at a normal everyday object, one that he used all the time, like a cell phone, a pencil, a sweatshirt, or anything. And then one day out of nowhere, he would just be like, I think that this is contaminated. I think this is contaminated. I think this is contaminated. Just so hyper-focused on it. And then once something was contaminated, in his mind anyway, he just would not touch it at all, ever. It didn't matter how much it was cleaned or how much it was sterilized. He literally could not even bear to pick it up or handle it in any way whatsoever. And that sounds really intense. But Tommy's issues with germs and with contamination only got worse from there. He told his parents that their entire apartment in Manhattan was contaminated, and there was no changing his mind or convincing him otherwise. I mean, it was firm. Now, if anyone out there has OCD, or if you know someone with OCD, you understand and know that there is no talking yourself out of a feeling like that. It just overpowers you. It just consumes you. It wasn't like his parents could say, well, you know what, we just had someone come and clean the apartment up, it's fine, and then he would change his mind. Absolutely not. If he felt like it was contaminated, it was contaminated. That was just that. So his mom, Shelley, noticed all of this. And of course, she wasn't a therapist or anything, so it's not like she could actually diagnose Tommy with anything. But she did take him to a bunch of different doctors, and one of them thought that he might actually have schizophrenia. The problem was, though, nobody could agree. It was hard to get Tommy, his parents, his doctors, and everybody else on the same page about what was actually going on with him. And I mean, you don't just walk into an office and within the first 5 minutes, they're like, yep, this is what you have, this is what we're going to do. There are tests, there's follow-ups, there's consultations, there's referrals, there's all sorts of different things. And Tommy just wasn't willing to go through with all of that. Now, I know a lot of times when it comes to mental health, sometimes people don't really believe in it or take it very seriously. Especially, and sorry if this is a stereotype, but it can be true, people from older generations who sometimes act like these issues aren't serious or aren't real. Sometimes in older generations, they don't even believe in therapy, talk therapy. They're like, no, we don't believe in that. You need to just figure it out yourself. It's all mental. You can do it. Like, there's not a lot of weight given to it. But here, Shelley and Thomas Sr. absolutely did take this seriously. They came to Tommy. They tried to get him some help. But by this time, he was a legal adult. So there really wasn't a whole lot that they could do if he didn't actually want to receive that help. Instead of seeing a psychiatrist or a therapist, Tommy decided that he was just going to self-medicate. So he began smoking weed, taking mushrooms, sometimes even taking LSD, really whatever he was in the mood for. And for some people, maybe things like that can help, whether they're microdosing or whatever it is. I'm not saying what he did was good or bad. That's his choice and it's all on him. But the point here is he wasn't just microdosing or being careful with little doses here and there. And it definitely was not helping him with his mental health. Not the way he was going about it, at least. He was not being methodical. He was not being careful. He was kind of just taking whatever, whenever. So from there, things started getting worse. He started having insomnia. He wasn't able to sleep at night. And this only exacerbated his OCD. It just made it so much worse. Plus, he was already exhausted just from school alone. So now all of these things combined, it was almost like his life became a wildfire that he just could not put out. At one point, he actually did agree to see a psychiatrist, but their recommendation was for him to be hospitalized. And that, according to Tommy, was like never going to happen. He was not going to admit himself into a hospital. Another time, after a very terrible bout of insomnia, Tommy again agreed, though, to get some help. But he only spent one night in the hospital before checking himself out. It seemed like maybe he had bigger issues than what one night in the hospital could do for him, though. Because he checked himself out, things pretty much just stayed the same. Thomas Sr. and his mom Shelley were more than worried for him. But they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, they considered involuntary hospitalization, but they knew that without Tommy's consent, they could only get a 72-hour emergency hold. That was the max they could get. And after that, he would be free to check out, and they knew that he would. So what were they going to do? They had to decide. And you might be thinking, okay, well, 72 hours is still better than nothing, right? Why not get Tommy in there, give the doctors 3 days, roughly, to convince him that he needs help and see if he'll stay in treatment afterward? Except Thomas Sr. and Shelley were really worried that if something like an involuntary hold didn't go over well, it would just end up pushing Tommy away. And then it would even be more difficult to help him. And my heart breaks for anybody who's ever in a situation like that, because you want to do what's best for them, and admitting them or Baker acting them or doing whatever needs to be done seems like that would be the right decision. But if the hold is so finite, if it's 72 hours or sometimes even less, then what if you just anger that person and push them away? Not saying that that's what you care about more, that you want to save the relationship. You obviously would want to help them. But if they are released 72 hours later and then they want nothing to do with you, they don't talk to you, they don't come around, how are you supposed to help them in the long term? It's a very fine balance where I feel like and that's why my heart goes out to people, because it's a balance where you would have to figure out what is the appropriate timing, what is the best action to get somebody long-term help, long-term care. Now, don't get me wrong, though. It's not like Tommy was totally ignoring his problems entirely. He would occasionally go to see doctors and different psychiatrists, but he just never would stick with any of their treatment plans, not long-term anyway. That was the whole problem. Now, somehow, through all of the ups and downs and his drug problems, he made it through college, and he graduated from Princeton in 2009 with a degree in economics. So next, he wanted to continue to follow in his father's footsteps. He wanted to become a successful businessman just like his father. It seemed like Tommy always had a plan. Now, whether or not those plans actually planned out, that's a whole different story. But his plan now was to prove that he could be a success on his own. He didn't want to just go work for his dad and have people think that his job had been handed to him. He wanted to create his own business and make his own success. He wanted to be able to look back one day and be able to, pat himself on the back and think, I did all of this. I did all of this myself. So apparently Tommy told multiple friends of his that he was starting a hedge fund. And he said that it was going to be run by this super secret algorithm that he had come up with. And he even registered a name for his business. It was Mameluke Capital, which that sounds pretty neat, right? For a smart person who just graduated from Princeton. Well, unfortunately, that was about as far as things went, because after he registered the business, Tommy never actually got around to, actually getting customers or making any money. See, in order to become an official Wall Street businessman, Tommy had to take an exam called the Chartered Financial Analyst Level 2 exam. Now, not only does it sound very fancy and it's a mouthful, but it is notoriously known for being extremely difficult. He ended up failing this exam, not once, but twice. And instead of, working his tail off to eventually pass the test, he kind of just gave up the next time around. He started taking jobs that you wouldn't necessarily think that a Princeton graduate would settle for. Things like bartending, which, to be clear, there is absolutely nothing wrong with bartending. In fact, you can make a lot of really great money doing that. But remember, Tommy had grown up with this elite of elite lifestyle. He had gone to schools, he had gone to Ivy Leagues, he had all of these connections. And just given the kind of environment that he grew up in and the people that he surrounded himself with, Tommy must have felt like he was letting people down now. Like he was supposed to be doing something more powerful, more impressive, more showier. I don't know if showier is a word, but something like that with his life, more glamorous. And he wasn't. So maybe he felt embarrassed by that. So when he decided that he was over bartending, he ended up moving on to giving surfing lessons to kids in the Hamptons. And when he wasn't working, he would just be in the Hamptons, living it up, partying. He went surfing with his guy friends. He drank like a fish. He hooked up with almost every woman who was willing to give him the time of day. I mean, just having a truly party lifestyle. Needless to say, he wasn't taking things too seriously. And I mean, honestly, why would he? He was in his late 20s, and even though his career goals hadn't worked out the way he wanted, he still had money. I mean, a lot of guys his age were living in, tiny, dirty apartments, millions of roommates, skimping and saving and doing everything they could just to go out to a chain restaurant every now and then. But that wasn't Tommy's life at all. So because of this, he was still completely dependent on his parents. They paid his rent on an amazing apartment in Manhattan. They paid for the fancy Jeep that he drove around, his expensive club memberships, and literally anything else that he wanted or ever asked for. He was always wearing the latest designer clothing, attending fancy black tie events. And all of that was before you get to the fact that his parents also gave him a weekly allowance, just to have for spending money. None of it went towards the bills, though remember, they were already paying the bills. This was just like cash to burn. And his allowance wasn't $20 a week or anything like that. Hell, it wasn't even $100 a week. They gave him $1,000 per week in allowance. $52,000 a year, a full career salary. So like I said, because of this, why would he take life too seriously? He didn't have to pay a dime in bills. His parents gave him more spending money than some people make in an entire year. Seems like he had it made. But of course, life wasn't as good behind the scenes as it all sounds. Tommy's mental health problems were getting worse, and they were now really starting to interfere with his day-to-day life. He even had some serious run-ins with the law. Now, I don't know the exact things that he was getting in trouble for at this point in time, but what I do know is that Tommy was not in a good place, and his parents really realized it. They ended up hiring a lawyer named Alex Spiro, and his entire job was just to keep an eye on Tommy's situation and help him get out of trouble whenever he needed it. Before he became a lawyer, Alex had worked at one of the top-rated psychiatric hospitals affiliated with Harvard Medical School. So that's one of the reasons that Thomas Sr. and Shelley hired him in the first place. They figured, okay, he has a lot of connections, both in the mental health field, also with other rich and powerful people, so he might be able to pull some strings in a courtroom if Tommy ever had to face a judge, or maybe get him placed in a good hospital if things ever came to that. It seemed like it was a really good fit. Except even Alex couldn't get Tommy sent to an institution. And that all had to do with the way that Tommy handled himself when he would go to court. When he was at home, it seemed obvious that Tommy was struggling with something. But when he got arrested and found himself in front of a judge who had, the power to send him away to a hospital for help, all of a sudden, Tommy would act like he was very put together, like he didn't have any mental health symptoms or problems. It was almost like a light switch was just flipping on and off, or putting on a mask and then taking it off. He would be able to fake being healthy and okay for however long it took, because for whatever reason, Tommy just did not want to go to treatment. He did not want help. He didn't want anybody to think that he had any issues. So instead, he would show up to court looking kind of like this spoiled rich surfer boy who was getting into trouble because he just loved partying so much and had no self-control. Which, hey, all of that could have been a problem too, yes, but you get what I mean. So basically, everyone who had any power to actually intervene and put Tommy's life on a different course just didn't. They would look at him and never believe that he actually needed that kind of professional help. Thomas Sr. and Shelley kept trying their hardest to get Tommy help. They offered him the best of the best, free of any cost to him. They offered him unlimited support. And at one point, somewhere in between when his symptoms first showed up in high school to now his late 20s, they almost did get through to him. Now that might sound like a very big, broad chunk of time, but that's because it was. It was just a constant fight for years. So here's what happened. Basically, Tommy admitted to his parents that he needed help. It was tough because we know there are a lot of people even today who don't take mental health seriously, especially men. But finally, Tommy was willing to admit that he was in a bad place and he needed his parents to help him. So they came up with an entire game plan. Tommy was going to go to a private facility, and his friends would never even have to know. His parents would just tell everyone that he was out of touch because he was surfing off the coast of Africa for a month, just enjoying life. So at first, Tommy agreed to this plan. They got the paperwork written up, and everything was in order. The only thing that he needed to do was sign the papers. But for whatever reason, when it came time to sign, Tommy backed out, and it was like things just went right back to square one. Well, actually, worse than square one, because from there, everything just went downhill. Tommy couldn't even fake being, this chill, calm, cool, collected, healthy guy anymore. His friends all knew him as laid back, somebody who enjoyed having fun, but that wasn't him anymore. He did a complete 180 from outgoing to just awkward, cool and collected to bizarre and upsetting. He had these violent outbursts, which those are his friends' words, not mine. And one really bad one happened between Tommy and somebody who up until then was his best friend, a guy named Peter Smith Jr. On October 3rd, 2013, Tommy was 29 years old. He and Peter were headed out for a wild night in the city, and a friend of theirs had made a movie called And After All, and Tommy even appeared on the movie on screen as an extra. So that night, they were all going to go watch the premiere. They were off to the city together. The plan was for Tommy to pick Peter up, and then they would go together. But as soon as Peter walked out of the building, Tommy just unprovoked literally jumped him. Now, if you're picturing a situation where Peter came out and got into an argument, and then Tommy sort of shoved him, bullied him, pushed him, think again. When Peter got outside, Tommy was literally hiding in the dark, just literally waiting for the perfect time to pounce, to strike. Peter was completely off guard when all of a sudden, Tommy jumped out and beat the total crap out of him. Tommy ended up breaking Peter's nose and giving him a concussion as well, all completely unprovoked. And when one of their friends asked why he did it, Tommy just told them, quote, "Peter's crazy. You don't understand." And Tommy was definitely right. Well, at least about the part where nobody understood. Tommy felt like Peter was out to get him, but there was no reason for him to think that. He was just paranoid and in his own head. So when his friends asked him to explain why he is so afraid of Peter and why he thought any of that, Tommy told them that Peter had hacked his phone, all to steal that hedge fund algorithm that he had created. I mean, at least that's the story that he told some of the time. Other times he said that Peter had been sleeping with his ex, and Tommy wasn't totally over her, so he thought that Peter, had basically violated bro code by getting together with her. Now, as for Peter himself, I guess this attack really drove home for him that Tommy wasn't stable or could not be trusted, He actually ended up filing for an order of protection against Tommy. He didn't care what Tommy's excuse was. He definitely wasn't interested in making up or getting any sort of apology or staying friends anymore, which, okay, fair enough. So he decided to get the order of protection. The issue was that even with the order of protection, Tommy did not leave Peter alone. He didn't jump him again or anything like that, but all of these weird things started happening in Peter's life. He couldn't prove that Tommy was behind any of them or anything, but it was just very suspicious, very strange. For example, someone called the local SPCA to accuse Peter of abusing a dog, which wasn't true. There was nothing to this allegation. But the SPCA still investigated, and they actually showed up unannounced at Peter's work to question him about what was going on. Peter was absolutely innocent, but he still had this awkward situation where his boss and now all of his coworkers had seen these SPCA investigators showing up, so it definitely wasn't good for his reputation. And even though he couldn't prove anything, he was pretty sure that Tommy had made that report against him, because that's what Tommy wanted. For Peter to be embarrassed, have problems at work, and just kind of be an outcast. So Peter was so upset by this, he actually called Tommy's dad, Thomas Sr., and he told him, quote, "You've got to figure out your fucking son, cause he is a crazy person." Now fast forward to May of 2014, and Tommy now started dating a woman named Brianna Ressner. Now, I guess even with all of his problems, Tommy, yes, was still a young, handsome, rich guy, so he had no problems meeting women. And the two of them met one time when he was out staying in the Hamptons. And they hit it off. They only dated a super short amount of time, and I'm talking just a few weeks, before they decided to move in together. They packed up, they got their place set up, and they spent the entire summer together on Long Island. In the fall, they moved from Long Island back to Manhattan, and as they settled back into the city, things kind of changed from the honeymoon stage to a spiral downhill. They started arguing a lot, specifically about Tommy's ex-girlfriend. Apparently, Tommy was still super hung up on her, and he would just, talk about her constantly. And it doesn't sound to me like Brianna was being unusually possessive or controlling or anything. It seemed like Tommy was still in love with his ex. So I would think that any person would have a problem with that. And then one day, Brianna found a box of condoms hidden inside the apartment. So she went to Tommy and she asked him point blank, "Why do you have this box of condoms?" And he said that the box was for them, which was a pretty obvious lie because, first and foremost, the two of them apparently weren't using condoms with each other. And even if they had been, why would he have hidden that box? Why not have it in the bathroom or in the bedroom if it wasn't some big secret? So it seemed pretty obvious to Brianna that Tommy was either cheating on her or he was planning to cheat on her in the future. But rather than do something about her suspicions, Brianna decided to just ignore them. Then came the strands of long, dark brown hair in Tommy's Jeep. Not only in his Jeep, also in their bed. Now, Brianna was blonde as can be, so obviously this hair did not belong to her. But for whatever reason, Brianna still didn't want to break up with Tommy. Mostly because she was at a point in her life where she wasn't very confident and didn't feel comfortable standing up for herself. Tommy was this handsome, tall man, had a great body, he was wealthy, so Brianna kind of just figured that she wasn't going to do much better than him, so she would just settle. And apparently she could tolerate some pretty flagrant cheating if that was the cost of having him in her life. But finally, Brianna found some evidence that she flat out could not ignore anymore. Text messages between Tommy and another girl. She found these messages on his tablet, so when she discovered this, she finally called it quits. She finally broke up with him, and this was in September of 2014. So they had only been together for, a span of months. She was hurt for a lot of reasons. I mean, obviously nobody wants to be cheated on. That can really hurt or mess with anyone. But it wasn't just that. Brianna had actually thought that she and Tommy shared something special, something that went deeper than anything physical. She also had almost been pretty much his entire world at that point, because he was pretty much in no contact with his parents. So she was the one that he relied on if he needed anything or needed to talk about his feelings or just not feel so alone. So all to say, Brianna had really felt like she was special. She and Tommy had such a deep connection. But it was obvious now that that connection only went one way. She cared about him and wanted to help him and support him, but meanwhile, he couldn't even keep his pants on for, a whopping 5 months that they were together. He just had to go cheating on her. And Brianna wasn't the only one who was having a hard time around the end of 2014, because things were pretty rough for Tommy's dad, Thomas Sr., as well. His good luck had finally run out because now his hedge fund was struggling. Now, these people were millionaires, so I gotta just say, I doubt that their version of struggling means that they were living paycheck to paycheck, but still, he was used to a certain lifestyle and way of getting by, and his business wasn't bringing in the kind of money that he needed it to do, not in order to keep living the way they were living. So Thomas Sr. made the very difficult decision to lower Tommy's weekly allowance. He reduced it from $1,000 a week to $300 a week. Now, Tommy was a 30-year-old man at this point, so he was very much at a point in his life where he should have been supporting himself. It would be one thing if he was out there hustling, job searching, trying to be independent, and, just hadn't gotten a break yet. But Tommy wasn't even trying to be self-sufficient. He had no ambitions, no plans to even get a part-time job. He had just been living the good life at his parents' expenses. Thomas Sr. knew that Tommy was going to be pissed off too when this allowance started drying up. But he kind of felt like, it is what it is. That's what I can afford right now. And honestly, maybe he was also kind of hoping that it would motivate Tommy to get a job or start studying for that exam again and then get into finance. Who knows? Now, I don't know this for sure, but I do also wonder if this whole less allowance situation was also partially out of spite, since Tommy had essentially cut off his parents. Even though he still depended on them completely financially, he wouldn't talk to them anymore. Again, I don't know any of that for sure, it's just speculation, but honestly, who could really blame them if it was true? Tommy was like this man-child who had been catered to all of his life, who was still being completely catered to and taken care of at 30 years old. And he couldn't even reach out to his parents to say, thanks, or just simply keep in touch. It's like Tommy didn't realize all of this money was a privilege, not a right. So a few months had passed, and on January 4th, 2015, Shelley heard a knock on their front door. She was confused. She definitely had not been expecting any visitors. But when she opened the door, she saw none other than her son, Tommy, standing there. Now remember, he hadn't seen or really talked to either of his parents in quite a while. They had been completely out of contact. But as a mother, Shelley didn't care why he was there. She was just so happy to see him. In the back of her mind, she had this thought that, okay, maybe he was there to argue about his allowance, but who cares? I just want to see him. I just want to be happy and spend time with him and see how he's doing. So she invited him in. And she asked for updates about his life. She asked how things were going. She was giving him all of the motherly attention that she hadn't been able to give him for such a long time. But he cut their conversation short. Pretty much just kind of, cutting to the chase and letting her know why he was really there. And he told his mom that the whole reason he was there is he wanted to talk to his dad privately about business. Now that almost made her even happier than the visit itself, because she thought, okay, great, Tommy was finally going to get his act together, just like she and Thomas Sr. had been hoping for. Maybe he's going to take the exam again. Like, let me go get your dad. You guys can talk. Shelley was smiling ear to ear at this point, and she was in such a good mood. And when Tommy asked her, hey, could you go get me a sandwich and a Coke from a place down the street, she didn't even hesitate. He could have asked anything of her in that moment, and she would have done it. She was just over the moon. She was elated. So she grabbed her purse. She's like, yes, honey, I'll go get you a sandwich. I'll be right back. Like, talk to your dad. I'm so happy for you. She threw her shoes on and she was out the door. But pretty much as soon as she started walking down the street, she started having reservations. Tommy and Thomas Sr. had in the past had their fair share of heated arguments, and she was always the buffer between them. However, now if she was gone and if another fight broke out, she wasn't sure what was going to happen. So after she had some mental, back and forth, she decided that getting back home and finding a way to keep the peace was more important than buying Tommy a sandwich. They had plenty of food at the house anyway, so he could just eat there. Maybe they could all go out somewhere as a family after the big business talk, after they, ironed everything out. So Shelley headed back home. But as soon as she opened the door, she knew that something was wrong. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no arguments happening, but there also wasn't any casual chatting happening either. It was just dead silence, and that alone made her sick to her stomach. Neither Tommy nor Thomas Sr. answered when she called out their names, and it was enough to really freak Shelley out. So finally, as she's looking through the house trying to find her husband and her son, she finally made it to the bedroom. And when she got there, she found Thomas Sr. unresponsive on the floor. But Tommy, her son, was nowhere to be found. Now, at first, she kind of kicked herself, telling herself that she should have known that this would happen, that they would have argued, and she wasn't there to be the buffer. Because clearly, while she was out of the house, Thomas and Tommy must have gotten into a fight, and Tommy must have punched his dad hard enough that it knocked him down onto the ground. She shouldn't have ever left them alone together. She knew them both too well. She was really feeling guilty about this. But then, as Shelley got closer, she realized that Thomas Sr. hadn't just been punched and hit the ground. He had a gun in his hand, and he had a bullet-sized hole in his head.
911, where's the emergency?
It's at 20 Beekman Place.
20 Beekman Place.
20 Beekman Place, zip code 10022.
What are your cross streets?
50th and 51st.
Are you in an apartment or private house?
8D as in David.
David, on what floor?
8th.
What's the emergency today, ma'am?
My husband is, I think, dead.
Okay.
Please
I'm
rush.
connect you to EMS. Do not hang up, okay?
Hello?
Okay, hello, caller. Is the ambulance for you or for somebody else?
It's for my husband.
Is he awake?
He's dead, I think.
How old is he, ma'am?
He's 60. He just turned 70.
70. Okay, there's somebody there with you?
No, just him and me.
And he's not breathing.
What? I don't think so. I can't get a pulse.
Okay. Stay with me one moment. Okay, that's at 20 Beekman Place, apartment 8D as in David, in the borough of Manhattan, correct?
Yes. How long will you be?
All right, I've already got the call out. All right, they'll be there quickly. You're getting firemen, the police, and the EMS. Is he on the floor?
Yes.
He's on the floor, okay. I want you to open up his shirt. Okay.
He's wearing a turtleneck.
All right, in which case, if you could kneel next to his chest. Okay.
Yes.
Is there somebody you could call to help you out, or?
No.
Okay. Kneel next to his chest. Put your left hand on the center of his chest.
Yes.
Just above the, the middle of his chest. Put your second hand on top of the first.
Yes.
All right.
I have to put you on speaker. Hang on.
Just be careful. Don't hang up, okay?
Hello?
Okay, I'm still here, ma'am.
Hang on. Hello?
I'm still here.
Okay. I'm pressing down. I've been watching emergency shows, like hospital shows. So
I understand. Keep your elbows straight. Use the weight of your upper body to
I think he's just dead. He's been shot.
He's been shot?
Yes.
Okay. Are you still willing to try to do...
I'm doing compressions now.
Okay. Keep your elbows straight.
Can I ask for a question, Aro?
What's that?
Can I ask for a question?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. You said your husband was shot?
Yes.
How long ago?
Probably 10, 15 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, maybe.
10 minutes ago he was shot?
Maybe 15.
By whom?
My son, who is nuts. But I didn't know he was this nuts.
He's nuts, but I didn't really realize he was this nuts. I mean, holy cow, talk about something right out of a movie. So as soon as paramedics arrived and police arrived on the scene, Shelley filled them in all on Tommy's history. She also admitted that Tommy's symptoms did sometimes come out as violence. Even though she never predicted that he might murder his father in exactly this kind of circumstance, Shelley and Thomas Sr. had always been worried that something like this could happen. So a full-blown manhunt began for Tommy.
Be advised, it's going to be a male white in his early 30s. He's wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt. His name is Thomas Gilbert, Jr. He may still be in the area. Unknown right now if he's armed or not.
And just 6 hours after the murder, the detectives were able to find Tommy by tracking his cell phone. And it wasn't like he was off hiding or ditching his phone or doing anything like that, not at all. He was back inside his own apartment. Now, he must have known that he was going to get caught eventually because he literally opened the door for the officers and told them that he was on the phone with his lawyer. Just so casually, like they were interrupting something, like, hi, I'm here, but I'm on the phone with my lawyer. Like, get a grip. Now, I have no idea why it took the full 6 hours, since it's not like Tommy was even trying to hide or anything, but the point is, the police were pretty lucky. So after his arrest, the investigators started looking into Tommy and also looking into his past. And they learned a lot. There was obviously the assault against his friend Peter, but now the police were learning that just 1 year earlier in 2014, Tommy had actually been a person of interest in an arson case in the Hamptons. The home that caught fire was owned by a banking executive named Peter Smith Jr. Sound familiar? It should. Birds of a feather, right? Yep. Just like Tommy was named after his father, Thomas Sr., Peter was named after his father, Peter Sr. So in addition to making those false allegations about dog abuse against his best friend Peter and straight up attacking him out of nowhere, Tommy also allegedly burned down his father's house. For whatever reason, he was never arrested or charged with anything, though. I mean, maybe they just didn't have enough evidence. But I do think it's fair to say that if Tommy had killed his own father, it probably wasn't the first serious crime that he had committed, not to mention the legal problems that he had had before. Again, I don't know exactly what kind of charges he had been facing in the lead up to all of this, but they must not have been that serious since he never went to jail, and his parents basically just paid his way out of whatever drama and circumstances he got himself into. But here's what I do know. In the months before the murder, Tommy had been searching for hitmen on Google. Searching for them like you would literally be searching for a restaurant. I'm not even kidding. He would look things up like hireakiller.com, findahitman.com. Like, it blows my mind. And you know what? This is a perfect example. I'm just going to harp on the education system for a minute, because one of my biggest regrets is like not going away to a big college and like getting a formal education in that regard. I mean, I got an education, but whatever, the college experience, because I went closer to home. But we talk about the Google history and the digital footprint every single time, catching these people and how people are so dumb. And right here is a perfect example that even a Princeton graduate who had all the means in the world, who had this Ivy League education, still was dumb enough to Google hireahitman.com. I mean, it's pretty bananas, right? Now, I'm not going to lie, I also wanted to Google both of those things so bad just to see what would pop up, but I figured it's best that stays a mystery. I don't want to show up on any law enforcement's list and think I'm actually trying to hire a hitman, so I'm not telling you to Google it. I'm not telling you to type it in. Do it at your own discretion, but it's wild, right? And the point here, or at least part of the point, is that clearly Tommy had no idea how to actually find a professional killer. Obviously, you don't just go to hireakiller.com and pick someone like you're getting a dog walker off of a walking site like Rover or something. It's so crazy to me. The other point is that Tommy had been planning a murder for quite some time. For a while, it's clear that he thought about paying someone else to commit this murder, to kill his own father. But since he couldn't find somebody to do the job for him, Tommy figured that he would do the killing himself. So the next step involved buying a gun. In fact, in 2005, many years before the murder ever took place, he told one of his psychiatrists that he was going to buy a gun. The psychiatrist literally wrote in his notes on Tommy that he was, quote, clearly a very disturbed young man, end quote. He told his doctor that he didn't want to hurt anyone with it, but he also wouldn't say what he was planning to use it for. So maybe he was already planning a murder even back then, a decade plus earlier, who knows? I do know that Tommy was going to have a very hard time getting his hand on a gun though, because in New York, you can't just go into a gun shop and buy one. And even if you could, Tommy had had trouble with the law, so it was going to be a difficult process for him. So because of that, in 2014, he started searching Facebook Marketplace, which we all know you can find just about anything on Facebook Marketplace, and it didn't take him long to see an ad for a .40 caliber pistol that was being sold by some guy in Ohio. So Tommy immediately began emailing back and forth with this guy, showing his interest in the gun. This was in May, and then he agreed to buy this gun for $575. But the question got to be about how Tommy was even going to get his hands on this gun. It was in Ohio. He was in New York. Well, the seller said he would mail it to him, which I got to just throw it out there, guys. It is very illegal to mail a gun. Don't ever do it. In fact, the whole sale was probably illegal. I'm not entirely sure, but I can't imagine that you can just like sling weapons on Facebook Marketplace without doing the transfer paperwork and all of that. But what do I know? So supposedly the seller later said that he didn't know that there were laws against shipping a gun in the mail, which I gotta say I don't buy that for a second, but since this isn't his story, I'm just gonna let it slide and move on. Apparently the shipping was going to end up costing something like $100. So rather than pay for that and pay for the shipping, Tommy decided, you know what? No, I'm just going to get it myself. I'm going to just drive 570 miles and get this gun myself. Which I've got to say, the gas alone has to be more than the $100 to pay to ship the gun. And that's even before you ever wonder if Tommy stopped at a hotel on the way or if he was buying food on the road or whatever. But let's just say, thinking ahead and planning were not Tommy's strong suits. So when he actually got to Ohio and bought the gun, he was apparently too thrilled and too excited to worry about anything else. He He was rambling on and on about what a great deal he got, especially since the ammo was free and included. The whole time he was just smiling from ear to ear. The guy who sold him the gun even offered to let him shoot it in the firing range that he had set up in his backyard. But Tommy turned him down. He was way too excited to just get back to New York, to start playing with his new toy, if you get what I mean. Now, obviously, the guy who sold the gun made a major mistake. And after the murder, when the police tracked him down and explained that the weapon that he had sold had been involved in a murder, he said that he felt very guilty about his role in everything. But he also said he had no idea how unstable Tommy was. And he told one reporter, "If I knew that he was psychotic, I wouldn't have even let him in my house." So was Tommy psychotic, as this guy John in Ohio said? Was he nuts, like Shelley described him? The big question is, what really even happened that day? Well, it's honestly kind of up in the air, because Tommy has never just come out straight and told the story in detail. And unfortunately, we also don't have the luxury of asking Thomas Sr. Shelley herself had a gut feeling that the two of them were going to get into an argument. So I think it's fair to say that an argument is probably what went down, the minute she left the house to go get that sandwich. Maybe not, though. Maybe Tommy went into the apartment that day calm and collected. We do know one thing about the murder, though, and that was that Thomas Sr. was shot at very close range. So close, in fact, that it's believed that the muzzle of the gun was actually pressed against his head when somebody pulled the trigger. And Tommy was the one who pulled it. So could they have been arguing? Absolutely. Could they have also been getting along, and the very moment Thomas Sr. turned around to maybe pour his son a glass of water or a drink or something, Tommy blitz attacked him and struck? I don't know. Either could be completely possible. Now, as for the motive behind the killing, if you just Google this case, every headline is some variation of spoiled son kills father because of a cut in their allowance, very money motivated. And greed is pretty much what is believed to be the motive. I mean, Shelley literally came back to the house without any of Tommy's requests that he had given her because she said she felt like they were going to get into a bad argument about money. And she wasn't going to be there to defuse it, so that's why she ditched the whole sandwich idea altogether. But then, after Tommy's arrest, things started getting messy. And this is where it starts getting controversial. Pretty much as soon as Tommy was taken into custody, his defense team began arguing that he was unfit to stand trial. They also brought in expert after expert to look at Tommy and basically say that jail was bad for his mental health, that he was only getting worse every day that he sat behind bars. But the prosecution brought in their own mental health professionals, and they said the opposite. While they didn't necessarily disagree that Tommy had a mental illness or illnesses in general, they did disagree with the claim that his illness caused him to not know what he was doing. So it was going to be up to a judge to make the decision, and they ended up siding with the prosecution. So Tommy's trial was set for May of 2019. But as soon as he showed up in court, Tommy looked like a completely different person. He was no longer this, hot, blonde, fit surfer boy that he had once been. He was sickly, he was skinny, he was disheveled. And I'm not bringing this up in a judgmental way, not at all, but I'm bringing it up because a lot of people pointed at his obviously not great appearance as evidence that he really was too sick to be there. Which I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, check out the before and after picture on the screen. Is this just part of what happens to you when you're locked up for 5 years, just waiting for a trial? Or was he actually that unwell? If it moves the dial for anyone, I'll also say that during all of the trial, Tommy had these random outbursts, and sometimes he would even refuse to go to the courtroom at all. A sign that he was unwell, or a sign that he was faking it? The answer to that question was up for debate all throughout the trial. And this next part is very interesting because his mom, Shelley, testified, but she never said anything bad about her son. She didn't even blame him for Thomas Sr.'s murder, which having to testify against him was of course extremely hard on her, but it was necessary. When she was asked how exactly testifying against him made her feel, she told the press, "I don't have any choice. You have to do it. It was obvious that he had done it. There was no one else around. Most trials you have to prove who did it, but that's not true of this one. What's cruel is that I have to relive it on the stand." In other statements she gave to the media, she actually said that she thought that Tommy's trial was unconstitutional because in her mind, he couldn't be held responsible. I'll also say Shelley got a lot of flack for that. People were like, if Tommy was so sick, why didn't you do more to get him the treatment before it got to this point? And I think I already covered how the situation was basically impossible for her, but she did still get a lot of hate and criticism for not somehow doing more than she already had. Whatever you agree with on that front, I understand, and everybody's entitled to their opinions, but she's a victim in this as well. She lost her husband. She also is losing her son, not only because of the crime he committed, but due to his mental health. I mean, and now she's being shamed on top of that. That is a pretty heavy load to carry. And there was one other detail about Shelley that ended up being a big deal in Tommy's case. See, she had a family history of mental illness herself. Her own dad was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and he died by suicide when he was 57 years old. Then, on Thomas Sr.'s side of the family, there were other mental health issues. Thomas's mother was, quote, psychotic, which obviously that's not a term we use this day and age, but that's what she was diagnosed with in the 40s. And this was a very big deal, because during Tommy's trial, there wasn't much question about whether he actually committed the murder. It was all about whether or not he was mentally stable enough to be held responsible. He actually pleaded insanity, and the fact that he had this long family history of instability helped his argument. The prosecution thought that he was faking his symptoms, but you can't fake 3 generations of serious and in some cases fatal mental illness, can you? So his trial lasted a long 5 weeks, but in the end, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. They just were not buying the insanity argument. Even after his conviction, though, Shelley still stood by her son's side. She urged the judge to give him the minimum sentence, and she hoped that with treatment, he could still live a good, happy life afterward. Needless to say, though, she was extremely upset when Tommy was sentenced to 30 years to life. Shelley told the media, "I don't know what the judge was thinking when she gave him the max. What good is that going to do? Would it deter the next schizophrenic person who is in a rage and is about to kill somebody? Would that person say, oh no, Tommy Gilbert got the max, that's not going to happen?" One of the things that broke Shelley's heart the most, too, was that due to the privacy laws, she couldn't even find out if Tommy was getting any kind of help in jail. She worked so hard to help make things better for her son, and she couldn't even tell if he was on the road to recovery after his conviction. To this day, she 100% blames the justice system for Thomas Sr.'s murder. More specifically, she has said, quote, "If New York State had provided the necessary help, my husband would still be alive. People need to understand what needs to happen when somebody's going through this so that they can get help early. Teenagers need to know how to spot the signs in their classmates. Just as early detection has been a huge factor in cancer success, it needs to be that in mental health as well. Which means the stigma needs to go. The more we talk about it, the less stigma there will be." She also feels like the whole trial itself just wasn't fair for Tommy.
It is very easy to tell who is very familiar with how we treat our very mentally ill. People such as journalists who have done deep research into it, clergy who have counseled families going through it, and families themselves. Every one of them speaks of it in the same way. It is worthy of a third world country with a harsh dictator or the Middle Ages. And our family situation is an example of that. As I have said many times in court, we have been trying to get Tommy into a hospital for 15 years. It's not a matter of whether he wants or doesn't want to take his medication. He is too sick to be able to judge. He needs to be in a hospital. Had he been so, my husband would still be alive today. The approach of the judge, her mentality of the whole thing was revealed almost immediately in court. During the fit for trial hearing, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance hired two doctors. Let me start that sentence over again. In August of 2015, Tommy was evaluated by 2 doctors from Bellevue Hospital. They did a thorough examination of everything required of them. they determined he was unfit for trial. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance and his team decided that they wanted their own person, whom they use frequently, to evaluate Tommy. They got Dr. Stuart Kirshner, who, generously speaking, did not even half of the required steps for fit for trial. He did not read his indication that Tommy only suffered from a little OCD. His interview, which was in court, was only 37 minutes. It's supposed to be at least an hour. The OCD, I should have written all this out. His assertion that Tommy suffered only from OCD meant that he had not read Tommy's medical records. His interview with Tommy was inadequate, and his conclusion was completely wrong. I will never understand why Judge Cyrus Vance and his team decided that was adequate work, and I will never understand why Judge Jackson went with his analysis. It makes no sense whatsoever. Her talk today in court is a reflection of that analysis and of her mentality. She has a reputation for being fair, but throughout these proceedings that has not been the case. Never once has my son, as Arnold Levine indicated, even begun to cooperate with his two different attorneys. That is one of the bedrocks of fit for trial. There is no logical reason for him not to work with his attorneys. The only reason is that he's too sick to be able to do so.
Well, what's next for
and anybody who cannot get through their own trial without having to be physically removed from the court by 3 guards is obviously not fit to be there.
And Tommy's lawyer made a statement after his trial and sentencing where they said, "The case was not about privilege or a spoiled child shooting his father in cold blood. I think this case is really about trying to find a way so that our mentally ill don't fill every jail and prison." I mean, it's very unsettling, right? Any case we talk about where a child kills a parent, you try to rationalize it, you try to understand it. And I'm curious, do you think that this was a case of mental health issues gone untreated, or an example of a problem in the justice system? Or do you side more with the prosecution and a lot of other people out there who just think that Tommy was a spoiled brat?
This was someone who had the ultimate temper tantrum. He said, look, a lot of New Yorkers go visit a psychiatrist. He was not so mentally ill that he didn't know what he was doing. He was vengeful, and he planned to kill his father. By the way, the judge and the jury agreed.
I don't know. Personally, I'm pretty conflicted on this. I also, for a very long time, was conflicted on the Menendez brothers case. And I know that they're going to have a hearing at the end of November, if it hasn't happened already, where they may get released or they may have a new trial. And everybody's talking about that case right now, but I'm just very conflicted. And I want to know what you guys think. We obviously know he wasn't abused, but he did suffer from mental health issues. So do both situations in those cases excuse, or not excuse, but, and I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. It's not excuse, it's not justify, but like explain. I guess that's the word I'm looking at. Do both of those situations explain the murder? I don't know. Maybe this case is just something that we'll never be able to completely agree on. I mean, it became famous because of the wealth and the privilege involved, and of course the connections to New York high society. There's even a book about it called Golden Boy, A Murder Among the Manhattan Elite. And there was also going to be a movie about it called Gilded Rage, which was produced by Jake Gyllenhaal. Tommy was also nicknamed the Ivy League Killer and was depicted as this greedy, ungrateful brat who killed his father over an allowance that honestly, he shouldn't have even been getting in the first place, and did it also he could keep living a lavish lifestyle that he didn't deserve. But it seems like there was more to it than that, and there are definitely problems when it comes to mental health and the justice system. So it really just comes down to whether or not you think that this specific case is an example of all of that. Which, if you've made it to this point now in the video, I've got to ask you, please, please voice your opinions in the comment section, because I genuinely feel like it will be 50-50. And I want to hear from you. I feel like as long as we get respectful dialogue going, it helps open our minds to different possibilities and different thought processes. So I'm interested to know what you think. In any event, thank you for hearing Thomas Sr.'s story and for hearing Shelley and Tommy Jr.'s story in this as well, because she is right in the sense that the more that we talk about mental health struggles, the less stigma there will be around it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, not only to stay up to date with new cases, but also YouTube once again is doing like a mass unsubscribe from myself and many other creators. So even if you are subscribed, maybe double check right now by hitting subscribe again. I don't know, but they like to do that from time to time. Who knows why? Anyways, thank you guys again for tuning in, and until the next one, stay safe.